Om Shri Sai Ram, offering my most humble and reverential pranams at the lotus feet of our beloved Bhagwan, Sri Satya Sai Baba. I deem it an amazing blessing of our Lord for allowing us, inspiring us, and guiding us to bring this wonderful offering called Sai Ram Katha. Before I give you more about this offering, let us start with our prayer and start this auspicious offering by remembering our Lord. Please join me. O Lord, take my love and let it flow in fullness of devotion to Thee. O Lord, take my hands and let them work incessantly for Thee. O Lord, take my soul and let it be merged in one with Thee. O Lord, take my mind and thoughts and let them be in tune with Thee. O Lord, take my everything and let me be an instrument to work for Thee. Om Shri Sai Ram, and welcome to this episode of His Story through the eyes of His voice. As you might have noticed, we are venturing into a new topic. Till now, you had a pleasure and we had a privilege of sharing with you the divine story as witnessed, as observed, as experienced, and as allowed by our Master to see this divine Lord. Today, we are starting another version of His story when the character himself becomes the narrator. The biographic depiction of Bhagwan, as narrated by him, we venture to share with you whatever little we have grasped from our Lord. So this narration of Ramayana with Sai Katha is a beautiful synthesis in which we may share with you behind the scenes stories which are not captured in the known scriptures but have been shared by our Master. As he says that I am the character, I am the role. So when I narrate my own story, I will give you more insight into what Avatar comes to do, what Avatar has done. So we will venture to share with you that aspect of Sri Ram, that story, the glorified story of our Sri Ram, and look at the story of Sri Satya Sai, how avatars come, why they come, what they do, how they do, and why they do. So let me introduce and welcome another brother of mine who is joining me today on this journey, and that is Brother Ranganath Raju. Sai Ram, brother.
Sai Ram, brother. Sai Ram.
So, brother, we have taken up this responsibility of sharing this Sai Ram Katha. So please share a few words from your side about this offering.
Sai Ram, brother. It's a blessing to talk about the Lord. I remember in one session when the speakers had to speak about the experiences that they had with Swami in the Dasara Yagna time. Swami had made this profound statement, which at that point I did not understand, but later it kind of made a lot of sense to me and gives a purpose to all these talks. He said, మాట్లాడేది వారి కోసం కాదురా నీ కోసం. He said, the purpose of your talk is not for them, not for the listener, but it is for you. So this sadhana is for us. It is for me. It is to live in those memories of the Lord, to spend these 90 minutes to 2 hours in the thought of the Lord. If the listeners benefit, if they enjoy, if they kind of get connected to the Lord, it is their devotion with the Lord. But primarily, it is a selfish motive that we are here for. At least I am here for, to think about the Lord and to speak about Him. And whatever little we know is all that I have to say, brother.
Absolutely, brother. I am 100% with you on that. In fact, I remember when we were discussing with one day something about Ramayana or something was happening, and Bhagwan shared some insight into Ramayana, and somebody sitting there, supposedly a very senior, knowledgeable person, he said, Swami, this incident is not written anywhere, even in Tulsi Ramayana or in others. How do we authenticate? And Swami, very naughty smile, looked at him and he said, Valmiki wrote whatever I told him. He's my biographer. Who will know better my own story? And
Yes.
so this is the beauty of it. So, brother, as we venture into this, I have realized through our learning that whenever any such auspicious thing is started, there is always some preparation before we jump into this.
Absolutely.
And so I thought, there is some kind of, what should I say, preparation from our end, which I would suggest our devotees, our viewers can also join us into. Like Bhagwan would always say, when you are doing something auspicious, you have to be certain mindful of certain things. And I understand while reading Vahinis, somebody had, maybe Bhagwan himself had mentioned, that to prepare yourself to read Vahinis, you require to do certain things. Now here we are venturing into receiving the story of two avatars. So I think we can easily go back and look at those prerequisites and we can use them as a pledges, which Bhagwan himself has given as to what should be our attitude before we read Vahinis or listen to the stories of our avatar and gods.
Absolutely.
So, right?
Yes,
So if
brother.
you can take us through this, it is like Pujya Bhavam, feeling of reverence. So every listener must have the feeling of reverence towards what they are going to receive. Bhaya Nirishanam. So it is like the attitude of patience, external calmness to receive what is being told and what is being shared. Bahiranga Parikshana, the attitude of inquisitiveness. I think this is one of the most, in Bhagavad Gita also it is mentioned, it's a qualification, a credential of a devotee to have inquisitiveness. And this is what he is expecting, even that inquisitiveness to learn, to know, to explore avatar must be there in the listeners. Then we have the nirikshana and developing the ability to introspect. So when we listen something, we have to look back inside and check where we stand. And then parikshana and testing what we have heard, what we have learned, the efficacy of it in our day-to-day life.
Yes, but in fact, the way in which Swami orders these qualities as Pujya Bhavam, Bhakya Nirikshana, Bahiranga Parikshana itself is at a very human level is very thoughtful. Swami lays that both the internal aspect and external aspect have to have certain qualities. And what are those? You need to be nirikshana. You need to be patient. when you listen to the story of the Lord or when you receive the word of God, it would not manifest in the way you expect it to manifest. I'm sure many of the students, many of the devotees can relate that probably Swami would have told something, a word, a sentence, some quip, which is which is appearing. I mean, at that moment, it appears to be non-related. It appears to be something out of the context, but at an appropriate time, it means exactly what it means to be. And we need to have that patience, that wait for that right moment to arrive, nirikshana and parikshana. But however, do not accept just because it is being given to you. Wait and seek to test it. And he says that kind of gives you the completeness of both the inside and the outside thinking of the human being. Now, if you look at Puja Bhavam, it is very reverential feeling. I remember one of our brothers he was passing by after his work. Uh, he was kind of blessed to stay with the Lord, and he had told me this incident once, where one stranger had come across. He was passing by from the office to the residence, to Swami's residence, and this stranger comes across, and he wanted to, kind of chat with this brother. So he started topic about Swami, and said few sentences. This brother then went on to continue the conversation. It went on for 3-4 minutes, and our brother left to the residence, and Swami was quite upset with him. Swami did not speak to him for quite some time. So this brother took the liberty and sought Swami's forgiveness. He said, Swami, I don't realize the mistake that I have done. Please tell me what is it that I have heard. And Swami tells him that Swami's subject is not a coffee table subject. It is not. It is not to continue your conversations. It is not an excuse to build friendship. You have to approach every word of God with that puja bhavam, with that reverence.
Oh,
So every letter that we are reading now, as you just mentioned a few minutes ago, that it is the same Rama who has written this story. It is same Ramachandra whose own life is being given to us as a gift. I mean, what more can we ask? If you look at the way in which Ramayana is written, the person who has to write Ramayana, he was built every cell by cell with the name of Rama. That was the power of Sri Ramachandra. And his story is being given by Sri Rama himself. And it is said, even Tulsidas at one point he says that any difficulty in your life, if you are childless, if you feel that you do not have money, if you feel that you don't have wealth, power, if you feel that you don't have influence in the world, all you need to do is take up this study of Ramayana for 21 days. And he says, it will be granted to you. And he says, it is like the Amrita Bhandam. In Telugu, Potana says that Lord Ramachandra, it is not me who is talking of your Bhagavatam or to talk of your story. It is you who talks through me. It is you who writes through me. It is you, in fact, that is the listener. And
just to clarify for the viewers, the Potana is not Putana. It is a poet devotee from that state. So it's Potana, not Putana. So.
Potana, yes. Potana was a legendary poet from the state of combined states of Andhra Pradesh, Telugu states. So he says it is the writer is Ramachandra, the listener is Ramachandra, and the story is also of Ramachandra. And here we are to undertake that journey.
Brother Raju, I remember, when our students, Bhagwan used to write plays, and once he had directed a play called Shankaracharya. And in fact, even in other plays like Krishna's play, Radha's play, the main role, the one who is to play, he was put under a very strict discipline or a lifestyle for those periods. I recall in one of the Shankaracharyas, the boy had to stay in Mandir alone in a room for over 6 months. in
God.
preparation to act like Shankara. So imagine for Bhagwan, these plays were not even the play, they were actually part of your life. So Bhagwan had to make that boy stay separately, and he went to college and he was not supposed to speak to anybody, attend classes, and get out and go straight to his room. And the only person he could speak properly was Bhagwan. So he would come back in the evening and Swami would talk to him. And he lived in this strict life for 6 months before he enacted. And when he enacted, obviously, needless to say, people did not see that person. They saw a Shankara's role, the different Shankara there.
We are talking about Sai Rama Katha also. So
Hmm.
I remember when the serial on Swami's life was made, this particular primary school boy who acted as the young Sai Rama, who acted as the young Satya, Swami went up to him and then Swami called him out and Swami said, "When are you going to marry?" He gave him prasadam and said, "When are you going to marry?" He said, "Swami," this boy folds hands and says, "Swami, I'm not going to marry in my life." Swami asked, "Why?" He said, "Swami, I have acted as Swami, I have acted as Satya. I'm not going to marry." How do I know this? We were sitting so far in the students' side. The kid was a primary school kid somewhere in the ladies' side. Swami got him to the center stage, and then he asked us. He asked him to talk to, announce it to everybody sitting there. He said, "See, this is the boys' resolution." And Swami was so happy, mightily happy. And Swami said, just just for being that Satya for a few days in his life, he has taken up this resolve. And one of the professor later tells me that even for days together, Swami would recollect this incident and Swami would say, "How blessed is his life." Swami said, "Enta adrishtavantudu." And imagine God saying that. "Enta adrishtavantudu." How blessed is this boy to have that resolution.
Where is he right now? Has he maintained that pledge so far?
Yes, as far as I know, few days back when I heard,
So
yes, he
sweet.
continues to.
So sweet. When you look at these thoughts, they're amazing. And it always brings up another topic, another thought to us is that, this cosmos is so huge. I always look at it like that, Raju, that there are billions of Milky Ways, right? In that billions of Milky Ways, ours is one. In this Milky Way, there are millions of solar systems. Ours is one. In the solar system, there are millions of hundreds and thousands of planets, and ours is one little small one. Even the Milky Way is a dot in the cosmic picture. Imagine the Earth in that doesn't exist. In that Earth, there are so many countries. In that country, like Swami would say these things. In this country, you have a state. In that state, you have villages. In that village, you have one house. In that house, there are many rooms. And in that room, you are sitting. So when I look at the human existence from this analogy of Bhagwan, I am forced to say that we have no existence. When my whole solar system has got no existence, then where am I? I am nothing. And
Absolutely.
yet, and yet we find that creator who created this mammoth creation, who created this multiplicity of variation, what we call creation today, chooses to take birth in my parlance as a human being. So this puzzles me all the time as to what is this grace? Why should Avatar choose to come in the smallest iota of the creation? Imagine the creator of this vastness chooses the smallest, like God particle entering into atom and giving darshan, right? So keeping this thought in mind, I would like you to share what Bhagwan has said about Avatar. What is the purpose of Avatar? Why do they come?
Yes, brother. In fact, there's a very famous poem which Swami would often speak about. He says, "Avatarinchu anakarthamemi." What actually is avatar? He says, "Janlapai priti vatsalya paratatoda," with lot of affection and love for the beings. The Lord comes down as what? Jiva prajna to bhatika daiva prajna. He mixes the jiva prajna, that is the individual self, with the universal self. And he moves amongst us
Pragya,
as avatar.
the pragya would be the conscious enlightenment, right? Consciousness,
Yes, consciousness.
awareness. You can say, okay,
Yes.
awareness.
Now, that entity, when it moves amongst us, it achieves at multiple planes, multiple things. And he says, in fact, I remember when Swami was distributing prasadam once, one boy was jumping up. He was Swami was kind of throwing those. You remember those days when Swami would throw those chocolates in during the
Chocolates.
Christmas time. So boys would jump up, and this particular kid was sitting right in front of Swami, and the chocolates were flying around, but he was not getting it because he's sitting right in front. So he's trying to jump up and hold Swami's hand, and Swami observed him 2 times. Third time, looked, hey, during those days also you jumped around. Now also you're jumping around. Angada, don't you have sense? And this boy was stunned. All the teachers who were sitting around, all of us are stunned there. What did Swami? Swami called him Angada. That was so effortless, as if he was talking to someone. He said Angada. And who was Angada? Angada was Wali's son, who lived during Ramayan's time. And another time, one of those devotees was, he was complaining about the hardship that he was having it with someone else in his office. So both of them used to work in the organization. So this particular gentleman was complaining to Swami, Swami, I'm going through this, I'm going through that. And that particular person, Swami, out of all the people, I'm not here to complain, but Lord, he's like Rakshasa. No, he's tormenting me. Swami said, yes, he was Rakshasa. That guna has not yet gone. He will torment you. Swami just smiled and said, yes, from that time he has been. So if you look at, there's a beautiful poem that Swami quotes. Yugadharma paddatul vigalitama yunda naimar gamna tikpi nadapu koraku. Lokam, and it goes on to explain as to what is the purpose of avatar. This poem talks about why avatar came. Why is this poem very important? We can see the lines here. It goes on to say Lokam bulella kallolamai chediyunda nishkalmasmu chesi nilpu koraku. You also have the translation following it. But however, I would request our listeners to come to that line, the third line. Yes, this is the meaning of this poem, where he says the age has lost its moral compass, so I came to turn it around and give it a new direction. Then world has fallen to chaos and evil. I came to make it sin-free and set it upright. I'm sure all of us can read. But I would request our listeners to take a look at that particular line. And the third line, brother, if you can just go back, or even here we can see, I came to fulfill the promises made in Treta. Treta nosigina korkalo tirchu koraku. I came down to fulfill the promises that were made in Treta. We might ask as to what are those promises? What did the Lord promise in Treta that he has to come down again? And we are talking about the same Ramachandra. Now, without this line and the last line, this poem means exactly the same to Sri Ramachandra as well as Sai Ramachandra. Now, in the context of Sai Rama, so our dear Lord, what is that particular promise that Rama made in the Treta Yuga that he had to come down again in Kali Yuga? Swami kind of clarified this, saying after the war, many Rakshasas and many Vanaras realized that their physical proximity to the Lord is now coming to an end, because the war has come to an end. Now Sita is one, they are returning to Ayodhya. Now they do not have any more avenues to be closer to Rama. So they start crying. And in fact, I remember Swami's description, when Rama is walking, they were trying to touch Rama. All the hands were trying to hold Rama's arms, and they were hesitant whether should they touch him or not. And with that hesitancy, but all of them were crying. And then they tell him that, Lord, these 75 days were too quick. They just passed off like a flash. We want to be with you. The Rakshasas, especially, they were saying that we could see you only for the 75 days. At least Vanara saw you for the last 8 months. Just please, we want to be with you. We want to be part of your mission. And that is when Rama says, there will come a time where I will use all of you in my mission. And those Rakshasas and those Vanaras are now all around.
So we have Rakshasas and Vanaras in this whole gathering of Bhagwan.
Absolutely. In fact, we don't need to share the name, but I know one of our alumnus, one of our student brothers who was Maricha in the time of the golden deer, in the time of Rama. And he gives a lot of speeches about Swami, eloquent speeches. And that same Maricha is now brought back as the speaker. And we do not know who each one of us are in that time moving with Ramachandra.
I'm speechless even to think about this, how it is beautiful. Brother Raju, whenever I look at Ramayana or Bhagwan's life, I develop a lot of sense of responsibility and a sense of wonderment, because we are so tuned by the environment and by the style of education today that we have a very false sense of knowing. And in that, instead of learning, we listen to question. We don't listen to learn. Neither we learn to grow. We learn to respond, to react. And in that attitude, when we look at life of Avatar, especially, it brings lots of confusion. We even develop, if I may use the word, an audacity to even question Avatar. As a student, you will agree, we spend so many days or so many occasions in blaming, like why Bhagwan is talking to X and not to me. Why Swami is giving him and not to him. We develop this kind of attitude because we cannot, first of all, we have to be ready to understand what are we looking at. Because what Avatar represents is an Yuga Parivartan style. It's a change of era. So he comes at a moment when everything is messed up to that extent, and then he comes to replace it. So obviously what he's bringing is so unique and new that unless we have the humility, the reverence, the shraddha to receive it, we will only look at it and start judging, start questioning, rather than inquiring and falling in love with him. So when I look at Bhagwan's life also, I realize how many times we might have questioned him in our ignorance. How many times we would have put a question mark in our own mind and heart about him. And that shows nothing went wrong with him, like nothing happened to him. He doesn't care. It doesn't affect him. But imagine, it shows how far we are even to receive him. And yet he was so gracious, so merciful, that he allowed us to enjoy his proximity. Probably for this moment when we can look back and slap ourselves and say, why did I do that? So before we jump into Ramayana per se, Raju, I think it will be appropriate for us to understand that era, to understand the time, understand that whole zone, so that we can put Ram in that perspective, so we can appreciate the Avatar's descent. We can even develop a sense of respect and appreciation and adoration for what he did, rather than questioning from our perspective with our limited and corrupted mind.
Absolutely.
What do you say?
Absolutely. In the conversations of my Baba and I, that John Hislop records very beautiful conversation in which he goes on to inquire Swami that Swami, people say that Rama was so handsome. People say that Rama was so attractive. How would it be if Rama appears now? And puzzling, the Swami's answer was very puzzling. Swami cuts him away straight and says, If Rama appears now, he appeared very strange. He says, Swami says, yes, Rama was very attractive by the measures that were followed in those times. And then if you read that snippet, Swami then goes on to explain, he says, there are different measures or definitions of beauty in different parts of the world even to this day. In some parts of the world, you would see people tearing up their lips, tearing up their kind of piercing their noses, piercing their ears with massive objects. And there's a particular tribe in Indonesia which kind of puts around 3-inch coin in their lower lip, and that is their sense of beauty. And some says by those standards, Rama was the most handsome. He had the most proportionate limbs. But if he appears now, it would be very different. Swami does not elaborate. But it is up to, because why would Swami not elaborate? Because he knows that a very careful reader would understand what Swami means. It is up to us to read in between those lines and understand what the Lord was actually indicating. Now, if you apply the current sense of logic, current sense of social circumstances, current definition of institutions, we fail to understand what Rama did or what Rama was. Not that we understand even with those definitions. Understanding Rama is beyond at least the ken of my mind, but at least we would get a glimpse of what the Lord did. I think we
So
should
Raju,
look at.
yeah,
Yes, brother.
I have highlighted certain points that I would like to, use that as a pretext to build up a scenario to understand that time and look at it. So if you look at what time it was, the era, what kind of people we had, what jatis do we follow, how was the birth aspect, we'll discuss that, what kind of society we were in, what was the society structure and institutions, and the customs like marriages and family, how they were built. What was the educational system, the Gurukula, what we use the term Gurukul nowadays very loosely, but let us understand what it was there, what was it taught, and then the ashram vyavastha, that is the whole structuring of society, division based on how the human grows and how responsibilities should change from one phase of life to another phase of life. So these are phases of life. So if you are with me, let us start and jump into
Yes.
these topics.
Yes.
So let us look at time. The time we have always, this is a lot of confusion. I'm sure, Raju, you will also agree with me that people have got different measurements and historians will tell us different things. So here we humbly say that we are not historians or any expert. We are only sharing you what we have heard, what we have read, what our scriptures quote, and what Bhagwan has also validated. So we are only sharing that part. Interpretations, I leave it to the viewers on their own. So just to get an idea about how far back Ram was, or what is the timeline, I would like to share with you a concept of time from Shiva Puran. Today, unfortunately, we have developed a British system of understanding 1 second is the smallest note. But here we notice the smallest measurement of time was Nimish. And 15 Nimish is 1 Sheta. So you can read all of that. It is a very beautiful growth. And 4.56 Nimish is equivalent to 1 second. So you can see how precise and how advanced our ancestors were, who had calculated time from a very mature manner. So from Nimish we come to Kshatas, from Kala, Muhurat. We use these terms even today. Is it a good Muhuratam or not? But actually the Muhuratam means, 1 day. 24 hours is a Muhuratam, in that which is the time. So we say the Vyavaha Muhuratam, we say like that today. So 30 Muhuratam makes 1 day and a night, and 15 days a night is 1 Paksha. So it's at a half, 15 days, which is roughly around there. So 2 Paksha is 1 month, and then month becomes 1 ayan. 1 ayan is equivalent to like 6 months. And then 2 ayans together makes it 1 year. 1 human year is 1 day and night of Devtas. Now here, Raju, if you can, give us a little insight into the variation. When you talk about devatas in Sanskrit, it is not same as God. So we
Yes,
have devatas, then we have Gandharvas, and all that. It goes up to
yes. In fact,
Brahma.
it was
And, so if you can just
the
quickly run us through that.
the seven lokas that we mentioned about Yaksha, Kinnara, Kimpurusha, Gandharva, Yaksha, Kinnara, Kimpurusha, and it goes on. And it ends with Brahma. And here it is the Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Rasatala, Patala, Mahatala, Patala.
That's on the bottom side.
On the bottom side. Now, Earth is supposed to be in between these two. Now, the way in which time moves for each of these beings is very different. And there is a very nice story in which Swami talks about the Maya or the power of time. If you look at some of these yogic videos, they talk about a particular yogic practice where even after leaving the body, some of these embodied souls, great yoga purushas, they kind of stay in that subtle form for, they say, for 100 to 1000 of years. And when the time is appropriate, they would just manifest. And one such manifestation was asked, I'm sure our brothers or sisters can find it on YouTube. They asked you, how is it possible that, how do you live across time? And he says, the years that you think years are is actually just a snippet of a second in the cosmic timeline. And I am there just for a snippet of that second as myself in that cosmic timeline. Just that you see it as years, as those thousands of years. And another time, Swami had one of the brothers had approached Swami saying that, Swami, I am going through quite a challenging time. No, I don't think, and in that excitement, this brother talks about saying, Swami, I don't think anyone from the beginning of the creation has undergone this pain. And Swami tells him, what do you know about the beginning of creation, or how long back has it happened? So Swami, people say that some billions of years. Swami, then the response that Swami gave was very interesting. He said, that is your definition. Now, billions can be billions also. And Swami said, Swami goes on to explain, saying that the time that what you think is actually your own imagination. It is constrained by your logic, by your sharira, and by your akara and vichara. That is by your thought and by your form. And that's how kind of we indirectly define time. And I think as subtle we get, the time also expands
With us. Actually, that is another discussion, but here we'll just take it up as it is.
Absolutely.
Basically, just to explain,
yes,
the yugas were measured technically in Devata's years. That is why I had to bring this down. So we understand when they say 1000 year is one yug, which is equivalent to multiplied by 308, roughly. That is the zone. So and then there is some calculation which says that the Satyug, which comes Satyug, Treta, Dwapar, Kali, and again it is Satyug, Treta, Dwapar, Kali. This going twice is one cycle. Some people say one cycle is one thing, and another say half of. So the whole division of this gets into broken up from half year makes it one cycle. And that is how they go for years and years. So you can imagine it is very difficult to calculate. But let me run it quickly through people. So Devata's time, and here is a snapshot of how the scriptures, especially Purans, explain the whole concept of time. So Satyug is for 4000 years, which is again Devata's years. Treta 3, Dwapar 2, Kalyug 1000 years. So they are all going down. If you look at it, is reducing. Okay, 4 yugas, when it goes 1000 times, it makes it one kalpa. That one kalpa is a day of Brahma. Like that, Brahma lives for 100 years, they say. So 8,000, not 100 years, sorry, their life. So 8,000 years of Brahma is one yug in that calculation. So 1000 yugs, 3007 life of Brahma. And life of Brahma, the full life, is one day of Vishnu. and one day, life of Vishnu is one day of Rudra, and they could not calculate how long. Even the scriptures I was reading, it is very interesting. They are very humble about it and saying that even the rishis could not comprehend that how long is the life. But whatever is the life, it is one day of Rudra. And then he explains it's a very amazing explanation. It says the Rudra, when Ishvara breathes in, that is one yuga gone, and the creation is done. It is dissolution. And when he breathes out, the creation happens. So the whole thing, what we are looking at, one day of Rudra, life of Rudra, is only one breath of Ishvara. So that is where Shiv Puran closes this calculation. He says, we don't know. Even the rishis have folded hands and say, Maharaj, we can't make out. So it is one breath in, and whole world creation is gone. Breath out, and the whole cycle happens.
So it is at an apparent level, this appears like an imaginative exaggeration. But if you look very closely, if you observe very closely, I was listening to one of the scientist interviews during these COVID times, and it talks about how a microbe that is sitting at the tip of your big toe at your foot, the time it takes for the microbe to travel up to the hair of your body is some hundreds of light years, because it is so small, so tiny. It says by the time you breathe, take one breath and let out another breath, hundreds of thousands of the microbes have actually born and they have passed away. It is very similar. I mean, you look at probably at that scale, we are like those tiny, tiny microbes. That's why when Swami says Anoraniyan Mahato Mahiyan, it is much deeper than what we can even understand.
But we can very well establish this much, Raju, that all said and done, we can safely say that Rama's time was roughly around 20,000 years back. That is the documented story.
Exactly.
Now, that 20,000, how it is calculated, don't ask me. Okay. So even Bhagwan has said it a couple of times. He said around 5,200 years was Krishna, and then around 20,000 years was Rama. And now, in which context of calculation Bhagwan has said, we don't know. But yes, if you look at from an ordinary perspective, we can still say that we are that ancient. Our history is not few hundred years old. We are literally 20,000 documented. And then we also have a documented history of Rama's ancestors. So Satyuga is another period. So if you look at that period of Satyuga, then we can easily say that we are at least 50 to 60,000 years old. The human race. And this is exactly what science also collaborates. When they map out when was the human being appeared on Earth, it is exactly in that same time zone. But I don't think they would comprehend the advancement of a human psychology, that consciousness in that manner. So because the understanding is that we were primitive and we are growing, but it is very hard to imagine. And for that, I feel, the reason is because the belief is that we have grown with the nature. Like, the amoeba became something, and evolution of a being. So that is why there is a scientific debate about we came from monkeys. And we look at this as we move forward. But when I hear Swami, when I read to the scriptures, I realize that we are not from monkey. We are as an evolution of a being. And it's an evolution of a consciousness. So if I look at it, it is, as I was sharing with you before, the air becomes fire. The fire is hidden inside the air. The fire gives birth to water. So water is inside the fire. This is how the creation, the five elements have come. So it does not mean that the fire disappears for water to happen, or air disappears to fire to happen. So one does not become another. One just is a cause of another, and both exist. So similarly, the whole creation in that process of evolution, humankind is the most evolved being from the creation point of view. But from element point of view, we are in the reverse order. From the most subtle of space, we became grosser and grosser to the earth. So from space, air, fire,
Shakda,
water,
Sparsha, Rupa, Rasa, Gandha.
Rasagandha. So we have
Yes.
come down, and then we have evolved from an amoeba, which is the lowest conscious level, to the highest of human being. And in this form, we have all the variations of this consciousness. So that is where Bhagwan also supported that thought when he said, Vanaras, we'll discuss that again, that how these people, they are all part of that evolution in which all existed. So it was not the
Absolutely.
human being was becoming animal, or animal was becoming a human being, or a
Yes.
Danava. So there are different variations of the conscious
In fact, brother,
evolution life.
this thought of evolution also, is derived in a very rude manner. If I have to kind of conjure this, it's Swami talks about what is spirituality. Swami says removing the animal qualities, sustaining the human qualities, and increasing the divine qualities. And how do you define what is animal, what is human, what is divine? Very simple logic that Swami gives. Anything that puts an order that this is greater, that is greater, this is lower, that is greater, that order, hierarchy is a quality of an animal or a Rakshasa. Any quality that puts you at par with everyone, it is human. Any quality that makes you feel that everything is one, that is divine. Now, when we look
Beautiful.
at,
Can you repeat it again? I think it's a very, very beautiful summation.
yes, this is what Swami said. Anything that puts an order that says this is greater, that is lower, human is greater, amoeba is lower, that is a demonic, or that is a quality of an animal. That's why lion would treat the deer differently, because lion feels that it's far superior than a deer. Anything that treats, any quality that treats every being as equal, as just like this being, that being also exists. That is the human quality. That quality that tells you everything is one, that is divine. Now, if you take a very close look at how this evolution is defined by a sage, by a by an evolved sage, by a scientist, and by probably by someone who is just beginning entering into the science, it would follow the same set of definitions. The sage would say everything is one, aham brahma, everything is one. A scientist who is humbled by the knowledge immensity would say all of us coexist, everything coexists. So a scientist who's just entering, who is very pompous about his knowledge, would say humans are the superior and animals are inferior. And if you look at Ramayana comes from this plane of human. When Swami says Valmiki Ramayana is a Ramayana written by a human being, he means many things. If you look at Ramayana, this exact definition also fits. Ramayana considers all the beings to coexist. That's why it talks about Vanaras, it talks about Manavas. We will go in detail in the next slides. It talks about the birds, it talks about bees, it talks about squirrels, everybody coexisting in that society. Yes,
Beautiful. Let us look at it.
Yes.
So I wanted to share this. Okay. So let us look at how we look at the people first, the first point. And again, we look at the people now. And okay. So physical attributes, if you look at it, Raju, I believe in that era, what Bhagwan used to share with us, we all know Ajana Bahu, we call Sri Rama. But I believe the height of that time, an average height, was around 16 feet. So we can safely say 14 to 16 feet was an average height. And then it came down to 12 feet. And now it is 6 feet. So
absolutely,
that
yes.
is how it is going down.
In
So
fact,
that was
we can go back to that snippet where Swami created the ring in Kodaikanal of Sri Rama.
Yes, please share that. Yeah.
Yes, the ring that Dasharatha gave to Ramachandra, or the ring that Janaka gave to Ramachandra in the marriage. And those are huge. Swami was literally putting his two thumbs and he was playing around with that ring. So huge. It appears huge for this frame, for this height. That is when Swami explained why are they so huge. It is because those physical frames were very big compared to what we see right now. And in that context, there's also another story that Swami talks about, that the wife of Balarama, who comes from Satyuga. Now she went to Brahma. She along with her father went to Brahma to seek a bridegroom for her. And now we just saw as to how many years of one Brahma would be on the earth. So they went to Brahma. They sought his appointment. They spoke to him. Brahma said, "Don't worry, you will get a very good bridegroom. Go back now." Now they came back, and by then Satyuga went away, Treta went away. Now they are in Dwapara, and she is huge. And Balarama, they come to Balarama saying that this is what we have been told, that you are the best bridegroom for my daughter. Balarama and Bhagavata very nicely it kind of explains the description that Balarama holds that plow and gets it to his height, and that is when he explains, says that as the yugas change, so also the height of the human being. And in that context, Brahma gives an explanation as to why that happens. It is because the subtlety or the purity of the thought kind of gets degraded over time, and that's why this kind of reduces even the human appearances and height.
And the age, if you look at the age, it is supposed to be around 20,000 years, average age in the time of Ram. And ages came down to around 200 years in Krishna's time, Dwapar Yuga, and now it is around 100 years.
Yes, in
So
fact,
this how the reduction has happened drastically.
absolutely. Swami talks about Krishna being 75, 76 when he went to war. He says he was in the peak of his health. In that, he's like how
Yeah,
we talk about
74
youngsters.
years. 74 years, I believe. Yeah, 72 or 74 years. And Bhishma Pitama was around 125 or 30 years. That was kind of age.
Absolutely, yes, and we also should remember that when you talk about characters like Valmiki, or talk about characters like Ravana, Ravana has been there. God alone knows for how many years, but he was the one who kidnaps Kausalya. Swami writes in the first chapter of Ramakatha,
Yes.
and because he gets to know that she would be the mother of the one who would kill Ravana. So even when he kidnaps her, his minister tells Ravan that, Lord, you are quite old, and this girl is just adolescent girl. We are talking about Rama's mother, and during that time, Ravana gets described as someone being quite aged. Imagine for how many long years Ravana would have been existing.
You know, it is written in Puranas that Ravan was approximately 280,000 years old when
And
he came for Sita's Swayamvar.
then what would be the age of Valmiki?
Because they were born in different yug.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we
So it
have to
is,
context all this. We have to keep in mind when you talk about these characters. It is not easy to pass judgments about what Rama did or what was achieved during those times.
and I think when time comes, we'll talk more on Ravan and other people because
Yes,
they were not an ordinary being
ordinary,
that we
absolutely.
just label them as Rakshasa and we say they were negative. It is very important to understand each one of them from that perspective to know how consciously they were playing a role which they were destined to play with full awareness of what is going to happen. So it is a very different era to play with. So let us look at another one, that is your society. So here, if you notice, the society was a very unique. See, today we talk about animal, love for animals. We have so many campaigns and programs. We try to adopt so that we can care for other beings. But that era, the society was such that all of these beings lived together. And not only lived together, they were like a partners. They would help each other. So just to give it a start, Nagriks are the people who were like human beings like us, who lived in cities and villages.
In Nagaras,
Vanaras were the people who lived in forest.
in
They
Vanas.
were Vangamaras. So they were forest dwellers. And then Pashus are the four-legged animals. And Pakshis are the birds. And like that, there were so many beings who lived together. And why do we call it as a part of the society is because there is a lot of examples and proofs which shows as we go ahead in Ramayana, we will see that they are, they are interdependent and they communicate with each other. Raju, you want to give an example about
Absolutely, yes.
how Ved also
If you look at, for example, the way Jatayu elaborately describes as to how Ravana abducted Sita. Had Jatayu not been there, probably Rama would have. Jatayu was the first clue that Rama was provided about Sita's abduction. And if you look at that conversation, if you read Ramayana, very eloquently Jatayu describes, even if you assume that the birds have actually learned speaking or they started copying human phonetics, that the ability to think and describe and put in a causal, in a logical manner, is not possible for birds. And we should understand that probably they were kind of different species. Or you look at his brother Sampati. He talks about where Lanka is and how far Lanka is. He was the one who gives clues to our Vanaras. You look at that squirrel which is carrying that sand, and it speaks to Rama saying that why is it carrying? And you look at, for example, that Kabanda, who is in the form of a massive tree. He had that
tree.
eye in his stomach, and he kind of moves around, starts making sounds, warns Rama and Lakshmana saying that do not run, you cannot get away from me. If you look at all this, I think we're probably, some of these species would have become extinct as the science is slowly realizing. And I'm
If you
sure, brother,
recall,
yes, the Vanara
yeah,
one,
if you
if you
recall,
probably,
if you recall that Taittiriya Upanishad is
absolutely,
given by a bird.
by bird, Tittariya birds, yes, Yagnavalkya, because of the curse of his father, Yagnavalkya vomits all the knowledge, and the Tittara birds just pick up, and then they start speaking, they start doling out those amazing truths of the soul in the form of Taittiriya Upanishad.
That horse,
Sorry. Even in fact, the horse also, Yajnavalkya was blessed. The Lord Surya comes in the form of horse, and it is that horse which teaches Yajnavalkya the entire Veda, the entire Yajurveda. And it is out of respect. Why? Because Surya also explained that his ancestors were used to feed horses, and that's why Surya assumed the form of a horse, and he gives him that explanation. And even if you look at, for example, the way in which uh, Gargi or someone else had debates, with Yagnavalkya, they talk about various species and the levels of understanding. He says 3, 4, 3 by 4, and 3.75. The variation goes on. It's a very beautiful conversation that, or rather, the debate that happened in Janaka's court. Our listeners can kind of take a look at it. But the bigger point is, animals were of some different species where they could easily communicate to humans.
this also points out a very interesting facet that not only humans had the ability to learn the languages of different other beings, even other beings had equal opportunity to do that or
Yes.
whatever. And as in humans, we have a different consciousness or different intellectual abilities, and similarly, other beings too had. So even though if you look at, say, Vanara, for example, not all the Vanaras were like Angad, Bali, and Sugriv and all that. So they also have gradation of calibers.
Right.
So it is a very beautiful thing to see that in that era, it was not like today when we say that we must be animal lovers. It was not that concept of that we are bringing and adopting an animal and putting in our homes. They all lived together. It was
And,
part of a respect, and everybody had their own territory defined, and they grew together, and
and
they
brother, probably
collaborated.
you should talk about Vanaras, the scientific uh, reasoning that is being brought out with the recent discoveries.
Very good. Okay. Actually, I remember, thanks for reminding. Actually, I remember in administrative block in Puttaparthi, in 80s, human skeleton was brought in, a human form, not a skeleton. Actually, it's a model of human being, and it seems at that time it was only two of them, and it actually is electrically guided, and it shows each and every internal organs and parts of the human body. So Bhagwan was very fascinated by that, and he sent all of us to see. So we would go in class batches by batches to see in ad block. And incidentally, when our class went to see, Bhagwan was also there. And some conversation started off that to the being human and all that. And I think the discussion happened that Swami, science says we are from monkeys and all that, Hanuman was monkey. Then Swami very, very beautifully said, Rudra, it is not the same monkey as you think. So they were forest dwellers, and he in fact mentioned, at that time he mentioned that they were forest dwellers, they lived on trees, and they had a small little tail. How Bhagwan used to talk, he would not give and sit and talk for the full description. He'll just throw one sentence here, and you have to just keep picking it up. What did he say? And in that excitement, you don't want to listen also many things. You just enjoy being with him. And he just mentioned that they were like human beings looking, but they had a small little tail, which was a normal progression because they lived on trees. So that was the Vanaras. The Sanskrit word Vanara is also connoting that one who lives in one. So forest dwellers were called Vanaras, and they were they were human beings with a little tail. And recently we actually explored that, and let me show this one. So this is if you go through the science, there is a being called Homo aprelensis. And if you notice, here is a tail part of it. This is a photograph they have taken from whatever they have discovered, and they found that this how their backbone was extended, and they were called Homo aprelensis. And this is the picture, like they have created, reconstructed the face of the person. So you would get an idea that they were human beings, but with a distinctive attribute of a small tail. Then the discussion, I'm sure people may get a thought that how come Hanuman grew that tail such a big that he could light a lanka or make a stool for himself, that we'll discuss when the time comes. We'll explore that part also. But this is what the Vanaras Prajati, as we call them, were. So yes, why don't you take us through Jati?
Yeah. And in fact, yes, if you look at the way in which the Jatis, or rather the sections of the societies were given, it comprised of the entire spectrum, not just human beings, but it starts right from Devata to Rakshasas to Manavas, Danavas, Gandharvas, Yaksha, Kinnara, Kimpusha. This is a beautiful snippet of Swami's discourse where he talks about Ramachandra's the fight that Rama was having with Ravana, and the Devatas feel that Rama standing on the ground is not appropriate. So they ask Indra to send his chariot, and the chariot comes down. Imagine in the current, just put yourself in that scene in the current circumstances where a chariot is descending from the skies, and what awe it would create, what excitement it would create. I'm sure thousands would throng, by thousands, probably lakhs would throng and look at the sky for the sight. But if you very carefully observe the way in which Swami narrates, even in the discourse or even in Ramakatha, he just talks about as it's a natural happening. In fact, even in Ramayana, Valmiki's Ramayana, they just both Vibhishana and Lakshmana, they just glance up and they tell Rama as if a leaf is falling from a tree, saying that the Lord, that silver chariot is descending. What should we do? And Rama says, can it be sent back? He says, Lord, Indra has sent it as a gift. You should use it. And it's not about the miraculous way in which descended. No, it is just a conversation that something has come down now. And if you look at, for example, Dasharatha's prowess, where he's talking to Vishwamitra and he says, I have sent my armies to Swarga to fight for Devas. And if you look at Swami's description of the last wishes of Ravana, he says, I wanted to, all the time I knew where this heaven was. I wanted to construct a bridge to heaven. I just kept postponing because it seemed very trivial task for me. I could have done it like this. I just thought probably tomorrow morning I'll do, but now here I am lying dead. Or if you look at, for example, Wali. What was Wali? I mean, he would in the morning he would from Kishkinda he would jump to the pole to the eastern sea in the Pacific where the sun is rising, and he would do his Sandhya Vandana and come back. And in the evening he would jump again to the western side and he would offer his Sandhya Vandana and come back. This is his daily schedule. We are talking about all those beings as one spectrum.
And they look miraculous because we are forced to see them from present eyes, from the
Absolutely.
present scenarios, and that
Yes.
is why it looks mind-boggling. But when you read, as you rightly said, if you read Ramcharitmanas or Ramayana or even Bhagwan, they all mention these things as a very matter of fact. They don't mention it as if something supernatural is happening. So that is one thing which we all have to really understand when we are dealing with such persona. When we are talking about Sri Ram, we have to understand what is the backdrop in which Ram appears. And that is the beauty of this whole conversation, to enjoy, to even get a glimpse into that yug. What yug was that? Where everybody was evolved. Everybody was a self-realized. Everybody was knowledgeable. They knew what to do. And all of them lived together. So let us talk about jatis, Raju. Please, if you can take it as.
But we're
So
talking.
Devtas, Manav.
Yes, we just spoke. The Devatas, Manavas, Rakshasas, Danavas, Gandharva, Kinnara, Kimpurusha, Yaksha. So that entire spectrum of of beings existed together.
One
And
thing we need to highlight here is that when you say Rakshas or when we say Devta, when we say
yeah, okay,
Danav, they are not different beings. They are not somebody with horns and with
right,
long nails and nothing like that. They were exactly like us, the human beings, Manav. The only difference in all these categorization is their degree of gunas, the attributes. The
absolutely.
people who had high level of sattva, the the sattvic qualities, purity, they were termed as devatas.
In
The
in
one who had
Chandogya Upanishad,
rajas,
sorry,
yes,
go on, go
please.
on. No, I'm just
Please carry
mentioning
on.
that in Chandogya Upanishad, there's a beautiful anecdote in which uh, it says the king of Devas and the king of Rakshasas. It is Prajapati talking about. Uh, sorry, Uddalaka talking about that incident. He says the king of Devas and king of Danavas come to learn at the feet of Prajapati, and the son asks question: Who is Rakshasa? Who is Deva? He says, wait, answer will come. And it says that Prajapati made them do all the course of the household for 14 long years. And after 14 long years, Prajapati pours some water on the floor, and he calls both of these students and he says, look at yourself in that image. So both of them look at that image, and he says, that is you. And both of them feel that they have got the answer for the question that they have come for. So they go out elated, but one mind begins to question, if that what you saw is you, then how would this form disappear? How would you be born again and again and again? What is it that is taking birth again and again? What is it they're suffering? And that keeps pestering, and one comes back. And Prajapati says, that is when Prajapati gives the definition, and he says, the one who believes that he is just this body, who is bound by senses, he is called Rakshasas. The one who went away thinking that mere form is me, it is the real me, that clan is called Rakshasas, who are bound by the sense, by the pleasures of senses, by the wickedness of the senses, or by the vicissitudes of the senses. But the one who knows how to control the senses, who goes beyond the senses, he says they are called Devas. The one who plays in between, one time able to control, one time being a victim, he says they continue to be Manavas. And that is the way in which Chandogya Upanishad kind of defines who they were. And some of these aspects, like for example, someone who is able to dance well he comes to be called as Kinnara, someone who's able to sing well. He's come to be called as Gandharvas. I remember Swami talking about those singers who had come for his birthday. So Swami said, Gandharvas Acharu. So Gandharvas have come. And we thought really Gandharvas have come, but Swami is actually meaning those singers. That is when probably Swami is indicating to us, take away that wheel of awe, or that miraculous ignorance of awe that you put. They are like any of these human beings, but with a different set of qualities.
I'm sure as we move forward in Ramayana, all these characters would come, and then we can discuss it further. But it is good to know that in Rama's time, all of these were what jati. I have written Sanskrit jati only because when you say caste, it creates a different connotation in the minds of people. So the classification of the beings in the society were like this. Okay, let's look at birth. I think this is a very interesting aspect about the birth part of it. Raju, yours.
Yes, if you look at all the characters in at least all the major characters in Ramayana who have occupied the central stage, all of them had unnatural births. We call it unnatural, but we will go into that aspect as to why they are not natural and why we are seeing that phenomenon even today. Now, all those people who have occupied the center space, right, starting with Sri Ramachandra himself. Sri Ramachandra, as Swami says, was a pravesha, and it was not prasava. That is, that supreme being has entered into the fetus separately. It is not that.
Let me give the word here for people who don't have the understanding of pravesha and prasava. Pravesha literally means entrance, and prasava is pregnancy. When you have the pain of labor, when you born out of labor pain, that is called prasava. And pravesha is when you enter the womb with will. So like in the recent past, we know as Jesus Christ was like that, even Swami was like that, Bhagwan Baba was like that. So many are known that way, but let us understand that as to what it means from this context now.
Yes. In fact, Sri Ramachandra, all of us know as to how Rama was born. That being appears from fire. He gives that pot, and then because of that, Sri Ramachandra, his brothers Lakshmana, Bharata, Shatrughna, and in fact Hanuman also comes out of that prasadam. Or if you take, for example, the another character called Sugriva, who was the army commander in chief, he was born out of the thought of Brahma. It was not a natural birth. You take the case of Ramana, similar is the case. He was also born of the thought of Brahma. Or if you take, for example, we just spoke about Hanuman. He was born out of the blessing. If you take, for example, Sita, she herself, she was found in the earth. It is not a usual birth like the humans. Now, is it only in those times? I would request brother to take it forward. Is it only in these times, or is that phenomenon continuing even today? It is continuing.
See,
that we are not
if you look at it in Dwapar also, you had as you rightly said, the main characters were all unnatural. All the Pandavas were unnatural. Even Bhishma was unnatural. Even Draupadi was unnatural. And if you look at Kali Yuga in Bhagwan's time also, I think this concept, what English we are writing unnatural, is, if I may use another terminology for it, it is birth not by a human act, but by the will of God. So the will of God is unnatural, we are calling it, because we can't comprehend how that happens. See, in Treta Yuga and Dwapar Yuga, you have at least some relevance where you could say that, okay, the avatar, the gods appeared, they could interact, they could come and have meals at your house, and they would go back. So there was a lot of documentation which says that there was an interaction happening. But in Kali Yuga, we don't have such things. We don't, even if the gods are moving around within us, or highly evolved saints are within our community, they are not exposed that way. So we don't know. But we certainly know one thing, the will of God. And that we have enough examples in our community. I'm sure many devotees would have experienced when Swami says, you just got married, Swami bless and said, Santosham, next year come with the son. Next year, you will have two children. So one blessing, and there are people who have not got childbirth for like 10 years, 15 years, and suddenly Bhagavan will give them an apple to eat, as if apple can, produce child. It does not. Like Paisam does not, it's not Paisam which gave birth to Ram and four brothers. So it is the blessing of avatar, the will of God, which, because it's beyond our normal comprehension, we say unnatural. So Raju, if I look at today also, at least in my knowledge, in a very limited way, I can say that I know so many people who have unnatural births.
Absolutely.
And they are all given by the blessing of Bhagavan. But I would
Yes.
like to explore, as you rightly pointed out, we know about Bhagavan because Mother Ishwarama herself declared about it. But we know one thing, that to have a child like Avatar himself, even the parents must be evolved. Even though,
Absolutely.
even though
Absolutely.
father
If
of
you,
Bhagwan and mother, they were very poor family, but they
yes,
were
brother,
very evolved beings. So can you
very
talk about
evolved.
them?
Yeah. In fact, it's documented, very well documented. Just that we have not paid much attention, but it was Kondamaraju who he had a vision of Satyabhama where she says that in the dream he sees a beautiful lady. She's getting drenched in the rain, and she says, "I need a roof over my head, and my husband would come here in few more years to come. So till then I would stay here." And then she enters that stone. That's when Kondamaraj is woken up from that sleep, and he says, "I have to build a temple," and he constructs a temple for Satyamama. Immediately after that is the birth of Pedavankamaraja happened. It's as if uh, that is done, and the phalam of that is given. And on the other side, in the Kolivikuntla, uh, father of Ishwarama, he has a deep urge to construct a temple for goddess Parvati. Such such strong was the urge that he constructs, and as the construction of the temple ends, Ishwarama is born. It's as if the phalam, it's as if the Lord has bestowed them with the phalam of those births. And these two beings happen to be the parents of the physical form of the Lord. I'm sure it is the case with, just that probably we may not know or we might not have researched, but it is the case with almost every being in that family who have lived with the Lord.
And I'm sure listeners can relate to these experiences with Bhagwan. And being in India, and I'm from Kashmir, and I can tell you that there are a lot of privileges of seeing such evolved saints in that era, in like maybe 30, 40 years back, in even Kashmir, walking around freely. And those who have literally by blessing, by just throwing at you something, and they can manifest into a child or whatever. So we have witnessed, it is not that avatar only can do that. Even a realized saints and evolved people can, they're called vakshuddhis, one who have achieved that level of purity and that level of evolution, that when they say something, it manifests. And this is what I'm really fascinated, that when we talk about birth, and in every yuga, whether it is Ram's or even Sai's, both we have witnessed a divine birth. And probably his entourage, which he carries along with him, they are also not ordinary, because you need a different kind of an combination to make a yuga parivartan. The transition of a yuga cannot be done by an ordinary being. What do you say?
Absolutely, brother. Yes.
So let us look at the next aspect, is the social structure. Okay. And what kind of society were there?
All of them had the joint families or extended families. We hear the stories of Rama himself talking about how he had played with his brothers in his childhood, and how Kaikeyi explains as to how she lived with her seven brothers and they played with their cousins. and how Sita and her cousins played. You look at, or for example, take the case of Ravana. All three brothers were living together. Take the case of
Together.
Vali and
Sugriv.
Sugriva. It was the same case. Take the case of Rakshasa, Karadushana, they were living together. Or any of these, Maricha Subhahu, they were living together. All these beings, I mean, who have played a key role in Ramayana, they came from this joint families.
So
And
in a way, if you look at the what we are aspiring today, you know, that we could have a families together, we could live together. In Rama's era, this was already in existence.
yes, it
People
was in.
had joint and extended families, and they lived together. Marriages. This is a very interesting aspect I notice in Ramayana era is that, uh, of course, the permission of women was very critical in that era, but they were very free and flexible.
Absolutely.
As we
In
mentioned about jatis, they could have intermarriages, what we call intercaste marriages today. So a devta could marry a human could marry a rakshasa could marry so it was all everybody could have families together.
Absolutely. Look, for example, if you take, I mean, even if you look at our own Upanishads and Puranas, they talk about the times when Swetaketu and Uddalaka lived, and Uddalaka talks about how free were women in choosing their life partners. No, they had absolute freedom. Even for that matter, look at the Swayamvara of Sita. Sita, it was Sita's choice that she could actually choose anyone, provided that they pass this test. Or look at, for example, why does Ahalya get cursed? It is not because she had a choice, she had an agreement, or she had spent time with Indra. No, if you look very carefully, the conversation between Agastya and her husband, it is not because that. It is because she lies. It is because she's not satiated even after doing that. And the sage does not hold her accountable. He says, you should control your senses, but I'm cursing you for speaking untruth with me. And if you look at, and it is in this context, you're talking in this context where it was common, the polygamy, or people having multiple partners was common. In that, it is in this context that our hero Sri Ramachandra sets his foot and says, I will take only one wife. And how does he take? Swami describes so beautifully in the discourse. He says, first, it is actually the brother of Rama. He requests, Rama, you have anyway broken that the Shiva Dhanus. Just look at Sita. He says, no, I will not. I will not look till my parents come. Then they get his parents. After getting his parents, Vishwamitra goes and says, I am the preceptor who brought you here. It is now, look at Sita. She says, I will not look. I want my father's permission. And Vasishtha comes and says, I am the guru. I am your guru. He says, at least I am telling you, at least now look. He says, I will not. And then comes the father himself. Dasharatha and says, now you look. He says, Father, why are you saying this? Only after marriage, Dharma asks us to look at another woman. Only after marriage will I look at her. And even in the marriage, he does not look at her till the final step happens. That is why, and Swami goes on to explain, Sita was also no less. She also took the same. I will not look at Rama. That is why that beautiful incident, the drama happens where Sita is taken by surprise when she looks at Rama. Rama is too tall for her to put that garland. And that entire episode of where Rama signals Lakshmana to
that
nowhere.
will that we'll talk when we come to that stage,
Absolutely.
because
My
it will be a
point is,
nice description.
it is in that context Rama took this vow. And now contrast this with the way in which Shurpanaka walked in. It is not wrong from Shurpanaka's point of view. As she was actually, we call her Shurpanaka, we ridicule her, but she was a beautiful lady with the eyes of a fish. She's called Meenakshi.
Meenakshi, her
And
name was Meenakshi, right? Yeah.
yes, she walked in saying that I would like to spend time with you. And Rama says no. And that hits her ego. The, if you look at the social structure, no, a male saying a female that don't come in, he is refusing her wish. That is what enrages her brothers Kara and Dushana. What Rama did, for the vow that Rama took, was extraordinary in those circumstances, and we should appreciate that.
So in a way, if what you're saying is that what Meenakshi did, or Shurpanakha, which got her name after Lakshman cuts her nose, uh, was not wrong from the social precedents,
Yes,
but it became wrong because for other reasons.
for other reasons.
That passion she could not control, the whole thing, and that we look at it, why these things turn into wrong. And that is the backdrop in which the avatar lands, and he sets the thing in the right spirit, in the right manner. So if you look at the customs also in those days, I noticed that whether we talk about Danavas, Devatas, Rakshasas, Gandharvas, whosoever, everybody knew their dharma. Everybody could quote at each other also. Even Bali was quoting Ram that Ram, it is not your dharma. I am allowed to do what you are not allowed to do. Because I'm a Vanara, I can do certain things which you can't do. So, and
Yes,
Ram also comes back to him and says, yes, you can, but here you are wrong. And how the dialogue goes, we'll look at it. So, the beauty of what I understand is that everybody followed dharma. All the customs and the rituals in that era were known to all and were followed by all in that letter and spirit. Will I be right to say that, Raju?
absolutely, brother. Absolutely. If you look at the conversation where between Vibhishana and Ravana, when the discussion is happening as to what they should do with Hanuman, it's a beautiful conversation where every participant in the courts from in the court quotes from one shastra saying that as per this dictum you can kill Hanuman, and when someone else quotes as per this dictum you can actually do this harm to this messenger, and Vibhishana counters all of them saying that as per this dictum, as per this Shukraniti, you cannot kill the messenger. And Ravana takes the final call because he is able to synthesize all these and says, I think what Vibhishana is saying right. And then Ravana gives his own justification. We unfortunately it is one quality. Swami very beautifully tells a story that one white ant entered a massive wooden palace. When that white termite was walking in, the palace looked at it and said, "Hey, come, I will give you ashram, I will give you residence, I will let you stay in me under my benevolence and shadow." This termite smiles and says, "You do not know whom you are welcoming," and it enters. And within weeks the entire palace falls down. It is the same is the case with that those characters called Ravana or Indrajit or all those Rakshasas. They were extremely venerable personalities in their own might. They were, he could read Dharma Shastras from back and forth. At fingertips, he could quote Ravana. That was all taken down because of those qualities that they could not control. And we will talk about what were those qualities that brought them down.
Sure. Okay, let's look at this occupational divisions based on aptitude. This is very interesting in a way if you really seriously look at this, that the society was broken down in a very very logical and very honest manner, that if you have aptitude and caliber for a task, that is your task. So that is why today we feel sometimes proud to quote that, okay, sage Vyasa was not a Brahmin, he was of a lower caste. See, the caste, we are looking at it, we are explaining these things, unfortunately, from today's context.
Right.
But in that context, there was nothing like lower or upper caste. Probably Vyasa's parents did not pursue what Vyasa pursued.
Absolutely.
So Vyas was immediately Bhagwan Vyas was became Bhagwan Vyas, and he was revered by everybody and called Brahmin, not because of the task or a birth, but because he was one with Brahman, and that is why he was Brahman. So the designations were amazing. So now,
Same
if
is
you
the
look
case
at
with
it that way,
Valmiki.
yes.
Sorry. No, I'm just saying the author of Ramayana himself has come from a very questionable background, from
Background,
questionable birth.
yes.
Yes, he was a robber, and he goes on to be called as the first Kavi of the human race, Adi Kavi. And you look at, for example, the charioteer of Ravana. He was a very low birth. He says, as per if you use the word birth or the caste, the current circumstances, he comes from and he laments after Ravana's death, saying that in spite of me coming from such background, you have given me this shadow under your benevolence that to ride your chariot. Now, a very subtle difference. Valmiki is trying to drive a very subtle point there, while on the other hand, that question never comes up with Rama's or Dasharatha's charioteer because they never let them feel that they were of lower birth. While our man Ravana was using all those perks to drive home a lesson that you are inferior and I am superior.
If you look at it, all the charioteers were the most confident of the king.
Absolutely, yes.
They were the most highly, advisors. They were high advisors of kings. They were the keeper of their secrets. They could trust them. They were trustworthy. So if you look at the structuring, that's why it's very important to note that even the drivers, so-called, they were educated. They were dharma, aware of whole dharma, but they chose that activity. And that is where they were defined that way. Okay, you are a driver, but that does not mean you are anything less than anybody else in the society.
Yes,
everybody had their role and everybody was respected for their role. In
Swami
fact, I would
talks
like
about
you to
that
elaborate
Brahmin.
on king. Yes.
Yes, brother. No, that's where I'm coming to. Swami talks about that conversation of the Brahmin with Rama, where Rama comes back and this Brahmin comes and questions Rama. And the way I remember very distinctly the way Swami was narrating, the Brahmin would walk into the court of Rama and would question him outright, saying that you have made a promise when you're leaving Ayodhya that you would give me this land when you come back. Now, 14 years, I have become quite old. You are not lived up to your promise. That is when Rama takes the staff of that Brahmin and throws it and says, the point at which this staff falls, till then, that is all your lands. And the staff kind of fell very far. But the point is, imagine what struck me was it was not unnatural for a commoner to walk into the court of the king and question him. And Rama laments, even in the movie which I was talking about that particular incident, Rama laments when he is leaving, when he has to leave Sita at a very physical plane. He makes a comment saying that this is my responsibility. Kingship is my responsibility. It is not a privilege. He does not say it's a privilege. It's my responsibility. It is my duty. And being a king was not an easy task. It is not.
I think we should
yes,
share that.
Research was
so
done by one of the Indic
idea.
scholars. Absolutely, one of the Indic scholars. She had done a research and she published these notes. This is the schedule of a king. His day starts at 1:30 in the morning. And he goes on to do puja meditation, then 3 to 4:30 is strategic meetings, which means, imagine, to meet the king, the strategic party has to be awake the entire night. You can work back. They would have actually sat all the night and prepared their strategies to be discussed with the king. And 4:36 is the meeting with advisors, teachers, and priests on religion. Why is that? Because teachers and priests are expected to be up at Brahma Muhurtam. They would have finished all their pujas and they are ready to brief the king about what is the way forward for their institutions. And 6 to 7:30 is the court talking about revenues, expenditure, and discuss matter of defense. If you look very closely, the entire economic activity would have started much early in the day. That is why at 6 o'clock they are giving him a brief saying that, King, this is what is going to happen in the areas of revenue and defense, etc. Then 7:30 to 9 is public petitions, and they say to come to King's Court, it would have taken, they would at least need to come 2.5 to 3 hours earlier, which means they would have been there waiting at 5:30. Imagine if we work backward, the entire day of that society would have started at 3:34 in the morning in the Brahma Muhurta, and King's starts 2 or 3 hours before or prior to that. And look at the pity. He gets this 1.5 hour of the entire day to bath, to take bath, and personal time to pray and have some breakfast, and the schedule continues. His
When I'm
time.
reading this, I'm realizing how Bhagwan lived his life.
Absolutely, absolutely,
And if
brother.
you, I know, I'm sure others can also vouch for us that Swami, he would be bathed ready maximum by 6 o'clock. His door would open, and that time you had that high, officials of Mandir. I recall Kutumrao Garu and Chiranjirav Garu. They would be standing there, and they would just brief him. He would give whatever, and then after that, there are other people who are waiting in line. Once he finishes with them, and he would come out for darshan. What we call darshan is actually a public meeting. So when I read this and he says, listening to public petitions and grievances 7:30 to 9, this is exactly what Swami used to come out around 7:20. He would be out for darshan.
Yes,
And he would actually spend time till 11 o'clock. But he did not have the hard line that he would not deal. So in that he would deal with people as well as simultaneously keep guiding the officials also. So he was doing multitasking till noon, and then he would go for a small. In the middle, he would rush in for a breakfast, so-called breakfast, and we all know that Swami used to take a very, I don't want to even call that a breakfast. Maybe a coconut water he will drink sometimes or something. He would call that as a breakfast. So that was his break, 5 minutes break in the middle to go and do that. And then in the afternoon, he would certainly take a break where he says recreational time spent performing yoga exercises. So I won't know whether it's yoga or not, but Swami used to be alone for an hour or so in the afternoon. And then we know again he would start the same thing. People would come to discuss with him, officials, and again meeting with the people, devotees, and all that. So if you look at the leading pujas, he was spending time with his family, which is us, in
bhajans.
bhajan, darshan, evening, and the same thing continues. And 9 o'clock, lights in mandir would be off.
Right,
I'm sure people
exactly.
would all remember 9 sharp, mandir would go silent. And even if you have to read, like Swami used to read letters, and we know those stories, that how he'll switch on his bathroom lights and sit on the floor and read letters so that others don't get disturbed that Swami is still awake. And rest the whole mandir is off by 9 o'clock. And exactly that is written here. And mind you, this is a Mauryan king schedule.
Right, exactly.
Okay, it is not even Rama's era, it is a which much later. So even if that the precedence has been followed till this era, that speaks a lot of our culture and our discipline. Amazing, eh?
Beautiful. In fact, there is one point where Lakshmana laments with Bharata that, when we were in the forest, I had all the liberty to walk up to Rama and talk to him, but now he being the king, to get his 5 minutes of time, no, I need to take multiple appointments with him. And he laments, saying, "Oh, those were the days of great blessing. I would have loved to be in the forest with Rama instead of this golden palace." And Bharata cajoles him. But it gives a snippet into what is the life of the king.
So you can imagine that what we are talking about professional obligations of society. If king followed that strict discipline, how do you expect everybody under him to follow? And that is the beauty of that era, which we have to understand. Similarly, when Swami, I'm very intrigued by a few things which I would like to share. Every aspect of Bhagwan is amazing. One day this thought had come to me, when Swami was physically growing older, and in he was on the wheelchair, and still he would shave every day and come. A thought had popped in my head that you are like a grandfather, for heaven's sake. We all have grown up now. So what if you don't shave? You have a long beard. Who stops you? And then I noticed we had an alumni day, January 1st, when some communication was happening, and Bhagwan suddenly asked, did that XYZ come? We said, yes, Swami. And very innocently, Swami turned and he said, in Telugu, you are saying that, I can't recognize them. They've changed. They've grown fat, their stomach has come out and all that.
Right.
And then he indicated that people are increasing their hair. When they're outside, they even have beard. So this thought came to me that Swami is so concerned that even today we should not have beard. Even today we should not have mustache. So it was always bothering me that Swami, since the student life is over, that discipline, should it be continued? And then it so happened, Raju, that in a very informal session, how, as I was telling you, I wish we could have a conversation with Swami. It is like, peace he throws. So somebody in an indirect information was talking to Bhagwan, and Swami said this. He said, see, I have to live an ideal life because so many people follow me. So if I tell my students that they should not have beard and mustache, then I should not have it. And imagine when he started the formal school system in 1962, he kept himself clean so that he could tell us to remain clean. Even in 2011, when he was not directly getting involved, but he was still leading an inspirational life, and he wanted to convey that message that my child, I am also shaving, you also shave. But we fail to understand that Lord did not make us good or make us live with him just for our selfish needs, that our college is over, our duty is over. He's saying the way, and he told that, he said the way my jurisdiction is bigger, in your own way, you are also influencing people. So you have to be conscious of how you present yourself. So imagine if I get into that thought, then I realize that, oh yes, it now makes sense that I must also keep shaving, because some children, some youth may follow me too.
Right.
I don't know. So imagine that consciousness of avatar, when I look at our Sai, it is emotional, it is overwhelming to think how deep he was. They call it Sukshma Buddhi, he expects us to have. How much he was conscious of everything. And he expected that his devotees would also lead that example. If he lived this strict lifestyle which you are talking about, and we know Swami lived much stricter than this.
Much stricter.
Much stricter than this. So imagine what he expects from his people who claim to follow Bhagwan. That's amazing. Your thoughts, Raju?
Yes, brother. I'm just overwhelmed with the feeling that what our Lord did to keep himself as an example to each one of us. One of the professor was once mentioning that Swami, you kind of take good amount of time to get ready for coming for darshan. He took the liberty to tell this to Swami. Swami immediately turned back and said to him, Kodai, Swami immediately turns back and says, hey, this is not for me. I have to maintain this body because thousands of those onlookers look at this form and then they feel happiness, they cry, they shed tears of joy, they take inspiration from this. It is my responsibility to maintain body in a manner which befits this stature. And
Super.
I'm sure Swami has done it in every aspect of his life. And Rama did it too.
Raju, we will continue this discussion, but let us have few questions, and I think we can do it next week about the following, because time is also, we have to keep in mind that we don't go, but we have some questions. I thought it would be nice to address them quickly. So one question comes here is how to explain rebirth if different yonis due to karmic effect. Well, we know that they are. It's a fluctuation of what should I say, gunas, which gives us these different yonis. But the only difference of rebirth is our attachment to the physical body. So the moment I think I am the doer, the whole game changes. Whether I am Rakshasa or I am Danava or Devta, that feeling of doership, the feeling of attachment to the body is the game changer. Raju, your input, please.
Absolutely, brother. The karma, it haunts it, and Swami beautifully explains that the vasanas, they wrap the mind, and then they force it, they bring it back to a form, and it is. And where does the karma generate? As you said, karma generates from ego. Ego is identification with the body, or rather doership, or feeling that I am a different entity from the universal self. That as long as that individual I exist, the cycle of punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, and we continue in the cycle of karma.
There is another question which says, what is the difference between Sadashiv, Rudra and Sadashiv? Actually, this is the terminologies. Don't get really disturbed by that. What they are referring in Puranas is that, that pillar of light, when you must have heard the story of pillar of light, which manifests as Shiva. So Rudra is that aspect. So when it says Sada Shiva, Rudra, which is basically that from where these three manifestations happened. So that's why Bhagavan says they are not different beings, they are one. And they also came from a source. So that source is called Sadashiva. So that's why the terminologies keep mixing. Am I okay?
Yes, yes, brother. Yes, in fact, we should take note of this when Swami says he is the Shiva Shakti avatar. No, Shiva Shakti is that that source from which these three murtis have come. Three murtis have come: Vishnu, Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. The creator, the sustainer, and the destroyer. In one of the Codex sessions, one of our brothers was speaking about these are the feet of Vishnu, these are the feet of so and so, these are the feet of so and so. He kept kind of poetic exaggeration, and Swami cuts him abruptly and says, "Hey, Apu, what do you know about me? What do you know about these feet?" And he says he shows his palm and says, "This palm has created Trimurtis. Even they have not understood me. What can you understand? Sit down." It also gives a peek that that Shiva Shakti, when he says I am the Shiva Shakti, is that Shiva and Shakti, that supreme force which has taken the form of a will, which becomes Shakti, and from which everything emerged.
That is in terminologies in Shiv Puran it says Mahat Tattva. That's term called Mahat Tattva. That Mahat Tattva, when it has a will to manifest, it becomes Aham Tattva. So that is the beginner, and that is what if you read Bhagavatam, it will say the Narayan part. When you say Shiv Puran, it will tell about Shiva. So both of them are actually trying to do the same thing, that there was some source of energy, so to say, which is Shiva Shakti, which manifested into these three gunas, which we call as Shiva, Narayan, and Brahma. So that's how it goes. Anyways, and another one, last question here is about intercaste marriages. Can you please advise of experience and discussion with Swami on this? Well, brother, as we go forward, we may discuss these things, but as we were discussing that in that era, this was more open and prominent. There was more flexibility because the conscious level evolution of people are different. They all knew dharma. So even if they mixed together, they knew exactly what they are mixing for and what they are trying to achieve. In today's context, the same law cannot be applied. So we have to look at our present scenario, that in Kali Yuga, first of all, we don't know ourselves what we are. That is why we have to be reminded that we are human beings. We are not human values. It is about human values, not animal values. So we are going from basics now. So we cannot duplicate the template of Treta Yuga and paste it on Kali Yuga and say, okay, since it was allowed there, now we will do the same thing. Not possible. It doesn't work like that. So here we will look at it as we move forward. we will look at those aspects also. Raju, if you want to add something, please.
Absolutely, brother. In fact, as Swami mentions, dharma or the operational dharma is based on desha, kala, paristhiti. It is dependent on the desha, the country's kala, time, and circumstances. Now, we cannot copy the actions of those days and apply here, because in the current times the desha, kala, and paristhiti are different, and we should move or behave ourselves according to the desha, kala, paristhiti of the current times, and that in a very easy manner, Swami says, is the definition of dharma.
Excellent. So, thank you, brothers and sisters, for joining us tonight. I think, Brother Raju, we will continue this process of exploring the era and move forward in our next session. And I really feel grateful to Bhagwan for this opportunity, and I hope you are also feeling the same. And it is such an enlightening, experience to learn what so many different facets of Avatar's backdrop. Any final words before we close for tonight?
Nothing to add much, brother. It is the will of the Lord that allows us to speak about Him. It is the will of the Lord that flows as thoughts and words, and all that we need to do is just to be those conduits and not to be blockades of that will to flow through. And we pray that this opportunity allows us to be those conduits, nothing more.
Thank you. So, brothers and sisters, thank you so much. With gratitude to Bhagwan, we close this session. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu. Samasta loka sukhino bhavantu. Thank you. Sai Ram.